So this is on origins of Juicy. We're talking about what goes into, or like ideation that goes into juicing a game. And yeah, let's get right into it. So who am I? Right, I'm John Korn. I'm a developer and artist at Cheap Ramen Games. We're based out of Brooklyn, New York. And we'll go a little bit more into what we do in a minute. We're part of Cheap Ramen Games is a part of Gumbo. Gumbo is a independent game dev collective in Brooklyn, New York. Brooklyn's broken up into like weird little neighborhood names. So we're in Dumbo, right? So Dumbo is down under the Manhattan Bridge overpass. So we're games under the Manhattan Bridge overpass. And if you're ever in New York and are fully vaccinated, you're more than welcome to send us an email and stop by. Always love talking to other devs. Okay, so here's some games I worked on. I've always really focused on gameplay interaction and or like player and game interactions, and just giving lots and lots of feedback on that, and making sure that it was very juicy and satisfying for the player, and kind of like inform them about the world and what was going on in it. Okay, and the first title from Cheap Ramen Games, although I worked on previous stuff. As this studio, we have released one title so far, back in March, and really focused on something that was small, could be made, and could be made in 12 months. Took 14. It happens, but that's not terrible. And then it's just really juicy, and every single action the player does is satisfying. So I'm going to play the trailer right now so you can see all that juiciness. There we go. Okay, so that's Meow. As you can see, everything the player does has like 6 or 7 cascading effects, depending upon the importance of it. And by the end of the talk, we'll go over like the thought process behind that, or I guess throughout the talk. Great. Now it's starting again. Let's the next one. Perfect. So what is juice, right? If we're going to be talking about juicing a game, like what is it? So according to the Game Feel book, juice and game feel are kind of like interchangeable. It's the same thing. It's this intangible but tactile, and they're contrasting ideas, but stay with me on this. So they're intangible, tactile sensations experienced when interacting with video games, right? So according to Steve Swink's book, Game Feel or juice is, or pure game feel really, is that perfect balance of real-time control, spatial simulation, and polish. So that's not to say that turn-based games or non-real-time control games can't have juice. They absolutely can. But as it was defined in that particular book, it can't. There are different types. So we're going to be talking mostly about this specific type of game feel, but those lessons can be applied to non-real-time games. Okay, and pretty much the way you can think about it is like if you strip everything else out of the game, right? All the visuals, all the audio, maybe not all of them, but if we white box a level, is this still an interesting game, right? Maybe. If not, how do we make that interesting, right? So all the other stuff will just enhance it. We need our base layer of interest. Right. So what can we actually juice in a game, right? What can we change in the game to make it juicier. So we can use input, response, context, aesthetic, metaphor, and rules. Let's actually go into each one of those and discuss really what they are, and like let's give some juicy examples. So input, right? Input's the way that, or juicy input is when you map buttons in a way that mimics what you're doing in the game itself, right? So this is super dinner table flipping. It's probably my favorite example. Maybe not the best recognized, but it's an arcade game. It's a custom controller, and in the game, every level is a little different. But in the level we're showing, in the first level, you're at dinner with your family, and you get very mad, and you bang your fists on the table, and you actually just bang your fists on the table to do the input, and everyone responds to it. And it feels really good because it's like it's almost one-to-one, and people are responding, or NPCs are responding to your actions. And then you get so mad that you flip the table, and you flip it as hard as you can, and then it flips in the game, and everything slows down and crashes and whatever. But like, it's really nice that that's what's happening, and you know that it's so like the real world. And you could easily just remake this game with, like, you know, a button press and a little bar that bounces back and forth, or, you know, you flick a joystick or something. But that would just, it would just lose so much of it. And it's gimmicky, but like it feels fantastic. Another something that, you know, you might be a little more familiar with is like Angry Birds, right? You're like launching these birds. So you pull back the bird and you release it and it launches. And that feels also really nice because you're mimicking that in-game action. So that's input. So response. So response is like how the game actually interprets the player's inputs. So this is a game from Pokemon Stadium 2, the mini games, which were fantastic. This is a Deli Birds delivery service, and it was one of the weird ones, but it was really good. I guess they're all pretty weird. So in it, what you would do is you would fill a bag with a bunch of stuff, and then try and deliver it. And the more stuff you had, the more points. But you'd have to try and make sure that your bag wasn't too heavy, because if it was heavy, you'd move slower. So if your bag didn't have a lot of stuff and you jammed on the joystick, your bird would move, or Deli Bird would move pretty fast. But if your bag was super full, you'd jam on the joystick and it wouldn't be very responsive. It would, you know, you'd be super sluggish, which, you know, kind of played into all the game mechanics, right? You're avoiding the, I don't know what that Pokemon's called, but you're avoiding the other Pokemon there. And yeah, it became this challenge not having super responsive controls. And the way that the game, the responsiveness of the controls changed based off of the actions the player made. And that was like a really cool way to play with input response. Great, so next is context, right? So input and response require an environment to give meaning to the player's actions, right? So this is something I made real quick in Unity, and it's a cube, and the cube is actually moving to the right continuously, right? Even right now, you don't see that. It just kind of looks like it's floating in space. The camera's moving with it, but as soon as we give context and background, there's a little more information there, right? Context could be a little bit deeper. We could see, you know, like we don't really know necessarily if the cube player is the thing moving or if the background is the thing moving, right? There are, you know, if this was like, we give the cube like a little slide to side movement, it might give it a little more context that the cube is the thing moving and not the background. But yeah, you need context in order for those first two items of juiciness to work, right? Input and response are meaningless without any sort of context. And next we have aesthetic, right? So aesthetic is extra details that influences the player's sense. It can amplify things, both audio and visual, and just make everything more engaging. So Animal Crossing, I think, is a great example of this because everything is kind of over the top, right? Everything is super cute and just great audio, great visuals, and it just makes you want to kind of stay in that world, right? I mean, the early Animal Crossings were a little less, but still had retained that interest. But if everyone was just different color blocks and really, chiptune sounds, or I guess like 8-bit sounds, you had like very few sounds for everything, it would not be as engaging. I'm sure there's an audience for it, but like it definitely would not be as engaging to a wide audience, and maybe not even for the hours and hours that you put into it, right? The just changing little things here and there, or just polishing up the aesthetic or keeping it consistent really makes it juicier. Right, so next we have metaphor. So metaphor is how the game feel works with the mechanics and everything that's kind of happening in the game. People have like preconceived notions about what should be like their understanding of the world and their understanding of the player's actions and the player's motivations, and all of these things kind of match up. You don't necessarily, you can kind of like break these and twist these, but you have to set precedent and keep the world consistent at least. So what this is a mod of Left 4 Dead 2, and they replace like the tank with the Kool-Aid Man, which kind of works as a new metaphor, because the tank will come in and break down walls. So that's the Kool-Aid Man right there. But then he throws bricks at you and tries to kill you, which is kind of like a mismatch with who the Kool-Aid Man is and what he tries to do. So you always want to make sure that it's kind of like your the metaphors and the story that you're using matches up with the gameplay, because that mismatch can really like pull the player out of the experience and give her really like a non-juicy game. And last up is rules. So rules are rules. I can't give an example for that. These are super abstract concepts, but the way you change your rules completely changes the way that your game feels. So play with those. Those are gonna have to change. Right. So there's a lot here, right? There's a lot going on, but we're only going to dive deeply into aesthetic. So let's talk about that a little bit further, like how we can make the aesthetics of our game more juicy. So how can we think about juice, right? So we can think about it using like the lens of the 12 principles of animation. So this is something created by Disney animators, I believe in the 30s. And they used it as an illusion that cartoon characters adhere to the basic laws of physics. And we're kind of doing the same thing when we're making games, right? This world doesn't exist when you open your project. There's no, unlike you're in the real world, there are some givens, right? If you're putting on a play or a movie, there's already atmosphere, right? There's gravity, there's a clear up and down. We don't have any of that. So we have to make that up. And somehow we have to create this illusion that this world, no matter what the theme is, the world's real, and the characters and objects and things the player are doing, they're actually doing inside this world that has like a consistent rules to that universe. And you don't have to like be very explicit about it, but you have to show it somehow, usually through visuals. And I will be relying mostly on visuals for this, because I don't do audio work. Okay, so here are the 12 principles of animation. However, we're going to use 6 of those principles of animation. And the reason why we're going to use 6 is the other 6 are really, they're more important for drawn animation. From like what I've done, I found that we don't necessarily need them. You can maybe find ways for them to fit, but I don't think they're necessary. So these 6 are great. So let's talk about them, right? So first up is squash and stretch. I use this constantly. So squash and stretch shows weight, mass, and material. If it's super stretchy, we can assume that an object is soft. If it doesn't squash, we can assume that it's a heavy, solid object, right? This is done a ton in Meow Pow. If you ever play it, which it's free. It's free to play game on Steam, so play it. Hit the ball around, see how it moves. Every time you hit it, or the faster it's moving, the more it squashes in the direction of velocity, or I guess perpendicular to the direction of velocity. It stretches in the direction of velocity, right? To show that it's a super soft, kind of rubbery ball. And when it hits a wall, it squashes the other way and bounces off in the reflection angle. So like it kind of conveys something about the material and the speed of the ball, which feels really nice. I removed it at one point, and then it just felt so stiff. It's kind of interesting how you can like kind of like tell the player these things. So here's an example of squash and stretch from Video Ball. And it's kind of used in a similar way that I was explaining from Meow Pow, but also it's giving the player the like another piece of information, right? It's telling you that, hey, you're interacting with this, right? It just wiggles out a little bit, but it's kind of nice that it's just like, hey, I know that I did something. You know, like if it just stayed stiff when you hit it, and you wouldn't necessarily know that you're interacting with it. All right, so the next one is anticipation. So anticipation prepares the audience for an action, and it makes it appear more realistic, right? Before you jump, you're gonna like crouch down to be able to bend your knees to jump, right? You're not just gonna jump. You need to like build up, and it kind of like informs the player that something's gonna happen. We can also use this as a way of telegraphing, right? If a NPC is going to attack you, they're going to like swing back their arm or yell, right? You can anticipate the action. You know what's coming. Right, so Mini Metro, this did a really nice way of anticipation. The rings, here it is. Those rings right there, if we watch on the next playthrough, are slowly closing up. They're actually using squash and stretch as well to kind of like make those points bounce, letting you know like, hey, you're about to hit a lose condition, which is kind of stressing the player out. But it just kind of keeps telling the player, like building up this anticipation, something's going to happen. You're going to lose. You're going to lose. You're going to lose. Draw your attention here. Try and fix this. All right, so the next up is follow through. So follow through is movement continues for a short time after an action ends. This is like the opposite of anticipation, right? In the same way that you can't just start moving without like trying to apply some energy to something, you also can't just stop on a dime. So we want to make sure that the momentum continues, right? So it just, I don't know, how do I say this? So like if you're ever playing a game like Mario, right, or Animal Crossing, I guess does it too, where you're running really fast and then you change direction, it's responsive because it stops you, but it shows some follow through because you like turn real quick and kick up some dust, right? That dust is the follow through. It's showing that you exist in that world. There is a force being applied in that other direction, the opposite direction of where you're running, and that force is kicking up dust from the ground that actually exists. Right, so here we have a Skate Story, which is not out yet, but is worked on another member of Gumbo here. And you can see that when you crash a skateboard, the character falls and smashes, right? It keeps going. There was, even though like they're riding the skateboard stops, but they're keep on moving. Slow in, slow out. So this kind of relates to what I was referring to before. You can also call it easing. So assuming what you're doing doesn't exist in a vacuum, it kind of doesn't make sense or feel right if things just start and stop on a dime. And it also doesn't feel right if as soon as, even if you have anticipation or follow through, you shouldn't just be hitting your max speed right away. It should kind of have this build up to it, right? Because you have to get there, right? You have to overcome like friction in different ways. So a nice example of this would be what the golf, right? You don't come to a complete stop. You have this slow out. The slow in's pretty quick. There's really no slow in, right? Because you're giving that initial force, but things are slowing down over time, right? They're getting this drag applied to them. They don't just come to a complete stop. So arc is the next one we're going to talk about. So most natural arcs or most natural movements follow arcs, right? So an arc, sorry, someone else is coming into the space. So an arc gives a little bit of realism, and a big part of that is because there's gravity in the world, right? So gravity would make things fall consistently in the up-down direction regardless of how you're moving in a left-right direction. I think a great example of this would be something like tower fall, right? In tower fall, everything moves in arcs. You shoot your arrows, they don't fall down in a straight line, they kind of curve. The way the player moves and jumps, it's all arcs. Even when they're jumping in a straight line, it's kind of like a one-dimensional arc, right? They jump straight up, and they're given that initial force. They move very quickly. There's like kind of the slow in, slow out, right? They move up, it slows down, they stop at like the top point of their jump, and then they speed back up till they move down. So, and actually then there'd be an animation for a follow through. So that's kind of interesting. And the arcs are something that I use all the time, not just for movements or animation or something like that, but arcs are really nice for just kind of like easing into things, right? You don't want to necessarily for everything just turn on and off sound effects, right? You would like increase the volume or slowly or quickly over an arc, which feels way nicer than just turning it on. Haptics or something else you can apply arcs to. You would bend them over time. All of my player movements, I put in arcs, use little animation curves over time, and it just kind of like, it's very, very subtle, but layering all of these subtle things on top of each other really makes a difference. All right, so exaggeration, right? So if you're going for like a one-to-one version of reality, it's kind of dull, and it's also very, very easy to miss those subtleties, right? There are a ton of subtleties in the world, and people can overlook things. So you want to make sure that you're overemphasizing things that are very, very important to your player, no matter what they are, just so people can't miss them, right? So exaggeration here is in Spelunky. So what Spelunky does is every time you're killing a monster, there's like this big particle explosion of blood, like 3 giant blood droplets, which is absolutely ridiculous. But here they're trying to communicate, hey, you destroyed that monster, right? Like, it's very hard to miss the fact that monster just appeared and now there's blood drops shooting all over the screen. Yeah, so this is very exaggerated, but it does exactly what it needs to do. It gets the point across. All right, so how can we apply this to our games, right? So the way I like to think about juice or game feel is breaking it into 3 different things, and then applying it in multiple ways across 3 different ideas, right? And so those ideas are tactility, information, and tension, right? You should be the way you're juicing things should figure out 1 or more of those 3 and apply these principles of animations to your particles, to your movement, to your animation, to your sound, to your haptics, to then give it more, to give the player a better sense of the tactility of the world, the information you're trying to convey, or the tension you're trying to create. So the first one up is tactility, right? So what tactility means is it's capable of being felt or touched. And we talked about that a little in the first slide. So if you're trying to make the world feel real and everything exists in a physical space, you need to make sure that you're like mimicking those forces on everything. So nuclear throne here, which is, the Flambeer is really known for screen shake, as I'm sure everyone knows by now. But a reason why that's so good is it shows how powerful everything in the world is, right? Every time you shoot one of the guns, right, the screen rumbles, and it's like as if you're actually peering into this world through a camera, and there's so much force that it's like throwing out these shockwaves that are moving this camera around, right? It's like what would happen if you're really there. And it does it like even more when you shoot that barrel, right? Everything kind of adds to this sense of tactility. And an actual sense of tactility would help, right? Where if you're using game pads and you do that, these little rumbles inside of, can't can't think of the name now. I'm thinking Tremor Pack, but that's a N64. I haven't used that in years. But yeah, so you're making the the controller rumble. That's a really great way of doing it, and actually having a tactile sensation using a keyboard and mouse. Screen shake works fine. It makes sense, and you can do it in a bunch of different ways. So next is information, right? We're trying to give some sort of detailed information about what is actually happening in this world, right? How can we let the player know things are happening through game feel and not just through actions, right? So in here, this is Pikmin 3, one of my favorites. And the Pikmin are being eaten by the strawberry monster that has a name that I can't remember. And you can see it through the animation, and that's good. But there are sound effects. There are little sparks coming off, right? These little sparks are actually, it's not, so the little sparks, there's like one particle spark for every single Pikmin that was eaten. So, you can kind of count them. And then what I really like is the little ghosts, like, oh, your Pikmin died. You're supposed to like actually feel sad. But it's letting you know two things. One, your Pikmin died, but also the ghosts are color coded. So it's like, oh, I know exactly which ones I'm losing. I can make more informed decisions about the game. It's not just there to let me know like this like binary thing, right? Is my Pikmin alive or dead? But actually, like, it conveys a little more than that. Like it's like when you in original Mario, you grab the mushroom, it tells you got one up, right? This is like one of my favorite ways to use game feel is to just like reveal a little bit like kind of like meta information about the world. In Pikmin, it's like they've kind of like made it a little more diegetic. They made it kind of fit the thematics that there are like Pikmin spirits. But yeah, you can do it as some sort of meta information or something that exists in this world. This is a fun one to play with. All right, the last one is tension, right? So tension's like stress is your body. It's pretty much stress. It's your body's reaction to a challenge or demand, right? So in Noita here, when you get hurt, right, the screen starts to fade to red and will eventually fade back out. But it's showing you like, hey, you better watch out. The game is about you're about to lose the game, and it's a run-based game, so that's a big deal. You're losing a lot. So this is creating a lot of stress for the player, and it's not just the way that the color comes on the screen and frames everything, but it's paired with sound, and it's paired with like some animation and some particles, right? It's layering all this stuff, but it really makes for a very stressful setting, and adds like a lot of like good tension that you want, right? Okay, so what does this mean for my game, right? So I don't want to tell you exactly what to do. There are a ton of game feel and juice tutorials that do that tell you exactly what you want to do. But being very specific, I feel like then everyone just adds screen shakes into their game, right? Not everyone needs that. But there are some rules you can follow, and some best practices, and some things you can think about. So first off is, I think the intensity equals in the importance, right? This is something I made up for a game where I just like basic platformer, right? So this is a way you can kind of like layer the juice and also like give it different levels of importance. So the importance would be like if everything has the same importance, nothing has any importance, right? Everything will just feel like, oh wow, that was really intense. Oh, that was really intense, right? And then it kind of loses all meaning. So you want to have things the player really needs to pay attention to kind of like be the juiciest action. So the player really pays attention to it. So I would say that one of the top things I would do, I would add a ton of effects to when the player was destroyed or like dies or is removed from the game, because that's something that is kind of important. You lost the game. The player 100% needs to understand they lost the game. The next juicy thing is the core mechanic. You want that to feel really good and give a lot of feedback, because the player is going to be doing that a ton, right? So, maybe make that really juicy. After that, the damage. The player needs to know when they're taking damage, right? Or when they're when something's happening that will possibly lead to them being destroyed, right? So they can know not to do that thing. You don't have to follow this exact pattern, but I think it's a good exercise to think about this and think about what's the most important actions or events happening in your game, and what kind of like juice, what kind of feedback, what sort of like even polish are you adding to it? And should it be more or less than the things under it? Maybe you need to reorder it. So this is like a nice little exercise to do. Okay, and then this is something I really believe in characteristics. I brought into a class I was teaching, and the students were really into it because it was just so juicy, and it was not really that interesting of a game to play, but like it gave a lot of really like good feedback, and people were just like the fact that they're hitting a ball and it was flashing and sparks and shaking, and it felt good, so they kept playing, right? So on the left, we can see what Meow Pow looked like after 1 month of development. Pretty juicy. After 1 year, almost just as juicy, right? There's a few things that my partner and I added and changed a little bit, but really not that much. So try this. This is super helpful. That's actually, let me go back 1 slide. That's what I did originally before I had, put it in there, right? Just put everything in every single action, and then slowly just start removing them until it feels right. And I think this is like a much better approach than being like, oh, I'll add this. No, it needs more. I'll add this, right? You might not know what it needs or really like what combination of things it needs, because it's not necessarily like one effect is cool and maybe interesting and convey something, but having a bunch of them in there and having them work in tandem gives it like some sort of new life, right? You can have 5 different actions that all have the same 4 effects, but then they have a different 5th effect, and because of which they just feel different. But they can still be like part of the same like effect family. So yeah, do that. It will take more time, but payoffs are way greater. Okay, so that is everything. Please feel free to reach out to me on Twitter if you have any questions, or you want some feedback about the juiciness of your game. I love talking about this. Or if you'd rather email me instead of tweeting me, that's fine. Or join our Discord if that is something you're interested in doing. And thank you so much for coming here this morning to listen to me. I know it's a little bit early on a Saturday, so not everyone wants to do that. So thank you so much. And if you have questions, feel free to come to the QA spot, and I think you can ask them there.
Hello.
Hey.
So have you run into a situation where there was too much juice and it caused the understanding of the actions to be confused?
So I feel like, yes. Maybe not with the understanding of the actions, but definitely like too much juice. So when we first released a demo, which maybe I should add another slide, test with a lot of people, right? Some people are sensitive, either to light or sound or sudden movements. And that was some of the feedback we got very early on in a demo we released on Steam. And we ended up putting in the settings menu in Meow Pow, where you can turn off the screen shake, turn off all of the flashing lights, turn off, I think you can turn off pretty much everything except for the particles, because the particles are pretty slow, just because it was like somewhat disorienting to people. And yeah, I think some of these things with juicing, you will definitely just get player feedback. You could definitely get a false positive result, right? Maybe if you juice like a player death too much, and it's like, wow, that's amazing. It's like, oh wait, I'm dead. But I think those things kind of reveal themselves just by having people try it out and giving you feedback. You'll kind of like know how to tweak and tune it.
Well, thank you.
Thank you. Can also go into another slide a little deeper if anyone wants me to reiterate anything. No? Okay. Great. I guess I will be in the hallways and such. I know this was supposed to be an hour. I talked a little fast, and I knew it was going to be like over a half hour, so there's no 45-minute slot. So that's that. But yeah, thank you all so much for coming, and feel free to reach out to me.